My name is Dr. Adrian Volkov, and I am breaking a federal non-disclosure agreement by speaking these words into a recorder I purchased with cash at a gas station in Flagstaff 3 hours ago. I do not know if anyone will ever find this file. I do not know if the people who took my passport this morning have already decided what to do with me. What I know is that on the night of October 14th, 2023, in a sealed signal processing room inside the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex in California, my colleague Renata Halverson turned to me with tears running down her face and said, "It just called me Pip. Adrian. It called me Pip." Pip was the name her father had used for her. Her father had been dead for 19 years. Renata had never told anyone at JPL that name. She had never told me. She had never written it down. It was the kind of small private syllable you only ever hear in a kitchen when you are 6 years old, and your father is laughing, and the radio is playing something you will not remember until you are 40, and it kills you in a grocery store. By the end of that week, 4 of us would hear our childhood names spoken back to us in a language none of us knew, riding inside a radio signal that should not have existed, coming from inside the cloud bands of Jupiter. I tried to find the rational explanation. I failed. I have spent 2.5 years failing. And now I am sitting in a motel room with the curtains taped shut because I do not believe what I am about to tell you, and I have a doctorate from MIT in radio astronomy, and I am the one who heard it first. I should start at the beginning, the actual beginning, not the version we were told to give in our reports. I came to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in 2017 as a senior radio frequency analyst on the Juno extended mission. If you do not know what Juno is, the short version is this. Juno is a spacecraft. NASA launched it in 2011. It reached Jupiter in 2016, settled into a long looping polar orbit, and began the most detailed mapping ever attempted of the planet's interior, its magnetic field, and the deep cloud structures beneath the visible atmosphere. Juno is not a glamorous mission. It does not return pretty pictures the way the old Voyagers did, although JunoCam has its moments. What Juno does is listen. It listens to the magnetosphere. It listens to the radio emissions Jupiter produces, the howling chorus of charged particles spiraling along magnetic field lines, the auroral hiss, the decametric bursts that have been observed from Earth since 1955. Jupiter is the loudest object in the solar system at radio frequencies, and Juno's job is to put a microphone inside that storm. My job specifically was to clean the data, to remove instrumental artifacts, calibration errors, terrestrial interference that had leaked into the downlink, anything that did not belong, to deliver clean spectra to the science team so they could draw conclusions about magnetic dynamos and atmospheric chemistry. I was in the most literal sense the janitor. I was very good at it. The team I want you to remember is small. There were 6 of us in the signal processing group at Goldstone during the October 2023 Perijove Pass. I will name them now because I owe them that much, and because 2 of them are no longer in any position to defend themselves. Renata Halverson, 41, lead engineer, a Norwegian-American woman who wore her hair in a tight braid and kept a photograph of her 2 daughters taped to the inside of her locker. Renata had been at JPL for 16 years and had the kind of competence that made other engineers quietly defer to her without ever quite admitting they were doing it. She drank black coffee and never sat down if she could help it. She had a habit, when she was thinking, of pressing the tip of her index finger against the small scar above her left eyebrow. Her weakness, if I had to name one, was that she trusted instruments more than people. She believed the data. She would say over and over, "The data does not lie, Adrian. only our reading of it lies. Marcus Idou, 36, software lead, born in Lagos, raised in Houston, the kind of man who could code for 14 hours and then play a Bach prelude on the piano in the rec room without having to warm up. Marcus laughed often and loudly, and was, beneath the laughter, the most religious person in the building. He went to a Methodist church in Pasadena every Sunday. He carried a small leather Bible in his backpack, not for show, just because. His weakness was a low-grade anxiety about being the only black engineer in most of the rooms he entered, which made him work harder than he needed to and apologize for things that were not his fault. Yuki Tanabe Reyes, 29, our junior signal analyst, a Caltech postdoc who had grown up in Hawaii and spoke about the Pacific Ocean the way other people spoke about a parent who had recently died. Yuki was brilliant in a way that frightened her because she suspected correctly that her brilliance was the only reason anyone tolerated her social anxiety. She did not make eye contact during meetings. She did make eye contact during data review, when she would lean across your shoulder and point at a spectrogram and say something that reorganized your understanding of the previous 6 hours. Ben Kowalski, 53, our hardware specialist, ex-Navy, a divorced grandfather who lived in a small house in Lancaster with 3 dogs and a workshop full of vacuum tube radios. Ben had the kind of weathered face that did not change expression for most of the day. He had served on submarines in the 80s. He understood signals the way a violinist understands a violin. His weakness was bourbon, which he had not drunk in 9 years, and which he talked about the way ex-smokers talk about cigarettes. Amy Castellanos, 34, our institutional liaison, the woman who sat at the end of the conference table and translated our findings into language a NASA administrator could put in a press release. Amy was not strictly part of the science team, but she was in the room for every meeting, and she was sharper than most of us realized. She had a law degree from Stanford that she never mentioned. Her weakness was that she had been promoted into a role that did not, in the end, allow her to do what she had originally come to JPL to do, which was build spacecraft. And me. Adrian Volkov, 44, twice divorced, the son of 2 Soviet emigrant mathematicians who had escaped Leningrad in 1979, with my mother 8 months pregnant and a single suitcase. My father taught calculus in a community college in New Jersey until his heart stopped in 2009. My mother is still alive, in a nursing home in Trenton, and does not always remember who I am. I came to radio astronomy because as a child I had been obsessed with the idea that there was something out there, sending. I have spent 30 years finding nothing, and I had made my peace with finding nothing. That peace is what got broken. I want you to understand what Perijov means, because the timing matters. Juno's orbit around Jupiter is not circular. It is a long ellipse that brings the spacecraft screaming in toward the planet every 53 days, dropping to within about 4,000 kilometers of the cloud tops at closest approach. That closest approach is called Perijov. During Perijov, Juno's instruments collect more data in a few hours than they collect across the entire rest of the orbit. The signal processing teams at Goldstone work around the clock during those windows. We sleep on cots in the back office. We eat cafeteria food that has been sitting in warmers since the previous shift. We get punchy, and we make bad jokes, and we live, for those few days, inside a small, intense world where the only thing that matters is the data coming down the pipe. Perijov 55 was the one that broke us. October 13th through 16th, 2023. The first anomaly came at 23:14 Pacific time on October 13th. I was at my workstation. Yuki was 2 desks over. Marcus was in the server room. Renata was on a call with the Science PY in Boulder. The downlink had been running clean for 6 hours. What I saw was a narrow band signal at 1420.4058 MHz, persisting for 41 seconds, embedded inside the broadband emission spectrum from Jupiter's northern auroral region. I want to be precise about what that frequency means. 1420.4058 MHz is the hyperfine transition frequency of neutral hydrogen. It is sometimes called the hydrogen line or the 21 centimeter line. It is the single most studied frequency in radio astronomy because neutral hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and that frequency is therefore the natural broadcast band of the cosmos. It is also the frequency on which any technological civilization would, in principle, expect another technological civilization to attempt contact because both would know about it. The famous Arecibo message in 1974 was broadcast at a frequency close to it. The plaque on the Pioneer probes references it. The hydrogen line is, in the SETI community, the cathedral organ of the universe. Jupiter does not broadcast at 1420 MHz. Jupiter's radio emissions are concentrated in two regions, the decametric, around tens of megahertz, and the hectometric and kilometric, much lower. There is no known physical mechanism by which the Jovian magnetosphere produces a narrow, coherent signal at the hydrogen line. I called Yuki over. She watched the spectrogram for 19 seconds without speaking, then said, "That's interference. That has to be interference." We checked the obvious sources first. Goldstone itself, the Madrid station, Canberra. We checked the spacecraft electronics. We checked for solar contamination. We checked the calibration tones the engineering team injects into the receiver to verify gain. None of them matched. The signal had Doppler. The signal had been redshifted in a way consistent with originating from a source moving with the Jovian system, not with Earth or with the spacecraft. The signal had originated, in other words, from Jupiter. Marcus came out of the server room and looked at our screens and said one word, quietly: terrestrial. We spent 4 hours proving that it was not terrestrial. By 3:30 on the morning of the 14th, we had ruled out every Earth-based source. The signal was not in any of the standard interference catalogs. It did not appear in the data from the previous Perijove. It did not appear in the simultaneous observations being conducted by the Very Large Array, which had been pointed at Jupiter for unrelated reasons. The narrow band emission was present only in Juno's data, only during a 41-second window during the spacecraft's closest pass over the northern auroral oval, and only at the hydrogen line frequency. Renata, when we showed her, said, "It's a glitch. The receiver did something." Ben, who had come in at 4 a.m. because he had a bad feeling and could not sleep, said, "Receivers don't glitch like that, Renata. Receivers glitch loud. That's not loud. That's quiet. That's a transmission." By dawn on the 14th, we had a working hypothesis. The hypothesis was that we had accidentally detected the leakage of a classified military communication, possibly bouncing off a satellite, possibly originating from an undisclosed lunar relay that had happened to pass through Juno's antenna field of view at the wrong moment. The Doppler shift could, with some torturing, be made to fit. We wrote it up that way. We sent the preliminary report to JPL management. We went to sleep. I dreamed of my father, which I do not often do. In the dream, he was at the chalkboard he had at home, the one he used to grade papers at night. He was writing a sequence of numbers, and the numbers were 1, 4, 2, 0, 4, 0, 5, 8. He wrote them and erased them and wrote them again, and when I asked him in Russian what they meant, he said in English, in a voice that was not quite his, "Adrian, please, come back to bed." That was a thing he had said to me in 1986 when I was 7 and could not sleep, and had wandered into the kitchen at 2 in the morning to tell him I had heard something on the radio. I had not thought about that sentence in 37 years. I woke up at 11 a.m. with my chest pounding and went back to Goldstone without showering. The second anomaly came at 19:02 that night. The same signal, the same frequency, the same 41-second duration, the same orbital geometry, this time during Juno's southern auroral pass. But this time, embedded inside the narrow band emission, when Marcus ran it through a higher resolution Fourier transform, there was structure. The signal was not a pure tone. It was modulated. The modulation was periodic. The modulation was, when we converted it to audio for the simple convenience of our human ears, a sequence of clicks and pulses that resembled, in a way that none of us wanted to say out loud, a slow human voice speaking in a language we did not know. Yuki said it first. "Those are formants. Those are vowel formants, that's a voice." Marcus said, No, that's pareidolia. We're tired." Ben said, "Run it through the speech recognition library, the general one, the one that does every language." We ran it through. The system flagged the signal as 91% likely to be human speech in an unknown or extremely rare language. It made no successful transcription. Renata, who had come in halfway through, who had been standing with her arms folded watching us work, who I had assumed was about to tell us all to go home and sober up, instead pulled a chair to my workstation and sat down. She listened to the clip 3 times. On the third listen, she went very still. "Play it again," she said. "Slower, half speed." Marcus played it at half speed. Renata said, "Adrian, it just said my name." I did not hear my name. I did not hear anyone's name. I heard a long modulated burst of static that resembled vowels, arranged in an order no human language uses. Renata said, "It said Pip. Adrian. It called me Pip." And then she started to cry, which I had never seen her do. Not when her grant got cut in 2019, not when her marriage ended in 2021, not when her older daughter had been hospitalized after a car accident in 2022. Renata Halverson did not cry. I want to say I was skeptical. I was. I noted in my logbook that night, in pen, in capital letters, auditory pareidolia under fatigue, Renata emotionally compromised, review in morning. I want to say I went home. I did not go home. I went to my workstation, put on the heavy noise-isolating headphones we use for spectrum analysis, and played the clip at half speed. I did not hear my name. I heard nothing comprehensible. I played it at quarter speed. I heard, embedded in the modulated burst, with absolute clarity, a voice say, "Adia." Adia was what my mother called me when I was small, before her English improved enough that she switched to Adrian. It is a Russian diminutive. My father did not use it. My ex-wives did not use it. No one at JPL knew it. My mother had not called me Adia in approximately 40 years, because by the time I was 8, I had asked her not to, because the kids at school had made fun of me for it. I sat in that chair with the headphones on, and I felt a coldness move up the back of my neck and into my scalp, and I thought, very clearly, this is the moment my life divides into before and after. I took off the headphones. I looked at Renata, who was still crying, quietly now, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee. I said, "I heard mine too." That is when Marcus made the sign of the cross. By morning on the 15th, all 6 of us had heard our names. Marcus heard Mark, which is what his older sister, who had died of leukemia at 9, had called him when he was a toddler, before she could pronounce the S. Yuki heard a Japanese term of endearment that her grandmother, dead since 2014, had used. Ben heard a single syllable, buddy, in a man's voice, which he refused to discuss, but which I am almost certain was the nickname his brother had used for him before his brother died in a car accident in 1979. Amy, who walked in at 7 a.m., expecting a routine briefing, listened to the clip once, on a regular pair of office speakers, and said in a voice without any inflection at all, "That's my mother. That's my mother saying my middle name." Amy's mother was alive. Amy's mother had been in a memory care facility in Tucson for 6 years and no longer recognized her daughter. The middle name in question, Amy told us later, was a name her mother had only ever used during her childhood and only when they were alone and only in Spanish. I want to slow down here because I know how this sounds. I know that I am asking you to believe a thing that, if I were listening to this recording instead of making it, I would dismiss before the second sentence. I would assume the narrator was unwell or lying or had been the victim of an elaborate prank. So let me tell you what we did next, because what we did next is the part that I cannot explain away. We isolated the audio segments. We had Marcus, who is more skeptical than any of us, run a phonetic analysis. Each of the names spoken to each of us occurred at a different timestamp within the same 41-second clip. The names were not the same audio file repeated. They were distinct phonetic events, in different vocal registers, in different languages, embedded inside what was otherwise a single coherent transmission. The transmission contained 6 personal names, in 6 different languages, in voices that none of us had heard in decades or had never expected to hear again, all packed into 41 seconds of modulated radio at the hydrogen line frequency coming from Jupiter. Marcus ran a control. He took the audio clip and played it for 6 unrelated employees of JPL, 3 engineers, 2 janitorial staff, and the woman who ran the cafeteria. He asked each of them if they heard anything in the clip. 3 heard nothing. 2 heard weird static. The cafeteria manager, a Filipino woman named Erlinda, who had worked at JPL for 22 years, listened to the clip and said, in Tagalog, that she heard her dead husband saying her name. Erlinda did not know what we were working on. Erlinda had no security clearance. Erlinda had been chosen at random. We did not put that in the report. The reason we did not put that in the report is that by the afternoon of the 15th, Amy had received a phone call from a deputy director at NASA headquarters, a man named Howard Klein, whom none of us had ever met, asking in the tone of a man who already knew the answer, whether anything unusual had occurred during the Peugeot 55 downlink. Amy, to her credit, did not lie. She said we had detected a narrow band signal at the hydrogen line that we could not explain, and that we were continuing analysis. She did not mention the voices. She did not mention the names. Howard Klein told her that a team from Goddard would be arriving on a chartered flight the following morning, that the data was to be sequestered immediately, that no further analysis was to be conducted by the Goldstone team, and that all 6 of us were to remain on site, available for interview until further notice. Amy hung up the phone, turned to the rest of us and said, "How does NASA headquarters know about this? I have not filed anything yet." Marcus said the thing we were all thinking. Someone is reading our data in real time. That is when we understood that we were not the only ones listening to the signal. Someone else, somewhere, had heard it before we had finished hearing it ourselves. The Goddard team arrived at 09:47 on the morning of October 16th. There were 4 of them. The lead was a woman in her late 50s named Dr. Helene Vance, grey-haired, sharply dressed, with the bearing of someone who had been promoted high enough that no one corrected her anymore. She was accompanied by 2 men who did not introduce themselves, and who I am, in retrospect, almost certain were not from Goddard. The 4th was a young woman with a laptop who took notes and never spoke. Dr. Vance interviewed each of us individually in the small conference room on the 2nd floor. The interviews were recorded. I was last. When I went in, she was drinking water from a glass bottle, and she looked at me for a long moment before she spoke. "Doctor Volkov," she said. "How long have you been in this field?" I told her. She said, "Have you ever heard of an experimental phenomenon called the Lazarus Channel?" I told her I had not. She looked at the 2 men, then back at me, and she said, "Good. Let's keep it that way." She asked me to describe what I had heard. I described it. She asked me whether I had told anyone outside the team. I had not. She asked me to sign a document extending my existing non-disclosure agreement, a document which, when I read it carefully, included language that explicitly classified the entire Perigeux 55 anomaly as a matter of national security and made discussion of it punishable under the Espionage Act of 1917. I signed it. I want you to understand that I signed it. I was not coerced in any way I could have named at the time. I signed it because I was 44 years old, and I had a mortgage, and I had a mother in a nursing home, and because a woman with grey hair and a glass bottle of water had asked me to. I signed it, and I went home, and for 11 days I did not return to Goldstone. When I came back on the 27th, 3 things had changed. First, the Perigeux 55 data had been removed from our shared servers. Not flagged, not classified, removed. The directory structure had been altered to make it appear that the relevant timestamps had never existed. Marcus, who had been quietly making backups for unrelated reasons, confirmed this within an hour. Second, Renata was gone. Her workstation had been cleared. Her badge had been deactivated. When I called her cell phone, it went to a generic voicemail that did not contain her name. When I drove to her house in La Canada that evening, the house was dark, and her car was not in the driveway, and her neighbor told me, with a confused look, that movers had come the previous week, and that Renata and her daughters had relocated to Norway for what the neighbor had been told was a family emergency. Renata had no family in Norway. Her parents had both been born in Minnesota. Her grandparents had been the immigrants. She had told me more than once that she had never been to Norway and was not sure she ever wanted to go. Third, Yuki had stopped speaking. Not entirely. Yuki could still answer direct questions in single words or short phrases, but she had stopped initiating conversation. She had stopped making the small, precise observations that had been her contribution to every meeting for the previous 2 years. She came into work. She sat at her station. She ran her assigned analyses. She went home. When I asked her privately in the parking lot whether she was all right, she looked at me with an expression I have not been able to describe to myself in the years since. She said, very quietly, "Adrian, it's still talking." I said, "What is still talking, Yuki?" She said, "The voice, my grandmother's voice. It didn't stop. After the Perigeux ended, it didn't stop. It's quieter now, but it's still there. It's in my head. It's been there for 13 days. I want to be careful here. I want to be a responsible narrator. What Yuki described could, in clinical terms, be called an auditory hallucination, of a kind that occurs in a variety of psychiatric and neurological conditions, and which can be triggered by extreme stress, sleep deprivation, or grief. The phenomenon of a beloved dead relative's voice persisting after a major emotional event is in fact well documented in the medical literature and is not in itself evidence of anything paranormal. I told Yuki this. I sat with her in my car in the parking lot for an hour and explained, in the gentlest terms I could find, what I just told you. I told her she should see someone. I gave her the name of a therapist a friend of mine had recommended after my second divorce. Yuki listened to me politely, and then she said, "Adrian, my grandmother is telling me things she could not have known. She is telling me what my mother named the baby she lost in 1989, the year before I was born. My mother has never told anyone the name of that baby. My mother has not spoken that name out loud ever in my hearing. I called my mother last night and asked her what she had named the baby. She got very quiet, and then she told me. It was the name I had been hearing in my head for the previous 6 days. I did not know what to say to that. I am still not sure I know what to say to that." I drove Yuki home. I went back to my apartment. I sat in my kitchen in the dark for several hours. Then I called Marcus. Marcus, it turned out, had not stopped working on the signal. Marcus, against direct orders, in clear violation of the document he had signed, had been spending his evenings analyzing the backup copies he had made on the 14th and 15th. Marcus had something to show me, and he did not want to send it electronically, and he asked me to come to his house in Pasadena that night. I drove to Pasadena. Marcus opened the door in pajama pants and a faded Lagos Marathon t-shirt, and he led me into his home office, where his laptop was open on the desk, and the spectrogram of the Peugeot 55 signal was displayed in 3 different decomposition windows. "I've been doing 2 things," Marcus said. He looked like he had not slept in a week. "1. I have been trying to figure out where in Jupiter the signal originated. Not just the auroral region, deeper. I've been correlating the Doppler signatures with Juno's positional data, and I think I have a source. 2. I have been looking at the structure of the signal itself, not just the embedded voice, but the carrier modulation, and I have found something that I do not want to be true." He pulled up a window I had not seen before. It showed a binary representation of the carrier wave, a long sequence of 1s and 0s extracted from the modulation pattern beneath the audible content. "This sequence," Marcus said, "is 2,480 bits long. I have been trying for 9 days to find a pattern. Last night I found it." He highlighted a subsection of the binary string. "This," he said, "is a prime number, a very specific one. It is the same prime number that was at the start of the Arecibo message, the 1974 Arecibo message, Frank Drake's message, the one we sent into space for the first time." He highlighted another subsection. "This," he said, "is the binary representation of the chemical formula of DNA, the same formula included in the Arecibo message." He highlighted another subsection. "This," he said, "is the population of Earth, as of 1974, to the digit." He looked at me. I said, "Marcus, that is not possible." He said, "Adrian, it's the Arecibo message. The signal coming out of Jupiter contains the Arecibo message, embedded inside the carrier wave, beneath the voices." I said, "Someone is broadcasting our own message back at us." He said, "Adrian, the signal at Arecibo was sent in November 1974. It was sent toward the globular cluster M13, which is 25,000 light-years away. It will not arrive there for another 25,000 years. There has not been time for it to be received and returned by anyone from anywhere. That message has not yet reached anything that could send it back. I sat down in his desk chair. I remember the chair was leather and creaked. I said, "Then how is it inside Jupiter?" Marcus said, "I don't know. But I know one more thing. The source. Inside the planet." He pulled up the positional analysis. He pointed at a region deep within Jupiter's atmosphere, well below the cloud tops, below the levels at which Juno's microwave instruments can normally resolve features. He pointed at a depth of approximately 5,400 kilometers below the 1 bar pressure surface, in the region where Jupiter's atmosphere transitions from molecular hydrogen to liquid metallic hydrogen, in conditions that no probe will ever survive long enough to study. "The signal," Marcus said, "is coming from inside the metallic hydrogen ocean, from a point source approximately the size of Manhattan." We did not sleep that night. We sat at his kitchen table and tried to construct a hypothesis. We could not. Every hypothesis we generated required us to discard a different piece of established physics. A natural phenomenon that produces a coherent narrowband signal at the hydrogen line, modulated with human speech, embedded with the Arecibo message, originating from a point-like source in Jupiter's metallic hydrogen layer, is not a natural phenomenon. It is, by definition, an artifact of intelligence. An artifact of intelligence that knew the Arecibo message before the Arecibo message had reached its destination, and that knew our childhood names before we had spoken them aloud in decades. Around 5 in the morning, Marcus said, "Adrian, what if it's not from out there? What if it has always been in there? What if there is something inside Jupiter, something that has been inside Jupiter for a long time? And what if it has been listening to us? All this time, every transmission we have ever sent, every radio program, every television broadcast, every private phone call that leaked into the spectrum. What if it has been there since before we were broadcasting at all? What if it just learned to listen first, and now finally it has chosen to speak?" I said, "Why now?" Marcus said, "I don't know." I said, "Why our names?" Marcus said, "I don't know." I said, "Why the dead?" Marcus did not answer. This is the part of the story where I would like to tell you that Marcus and I went to the authorities, that we found a sympathetic ear, that the scientific establishment took our findings seriously, and the world responded with measured curiosity. None of that happened. What happened was that on the morning of November 4th, 2023, Marcus Idowu was killed in a single-car accident on the 134 freeway near Eagle Rock. The official report, which I have read, states that he lost control of his Honda Civic during a rainstorm, struck a concrete divider at high speed, and was pronounced dead at the scene. Marcus had been driving home from a Sunday service at his church. He did not drink. He did not speed. The Civic was 4 years old and had passed its most recent inspection 2 months earlier. His laptop was not found in the wreckage. His backpack, the one he carried everywhere, the one that contained the small leather Bible, was not found in the wreckage. His phone was not found in the wreckage. The police told his widow, a kind woman named Folek, whom I had met once at a Christmas party, that personal effects were sometimes ejected during high-speed collisions and recovered later from the roadside. They were never recovered. I attended the funeral. I sat in the back. Folek hugged me and thanked me for coming and asked if I knew what Marcus had been working on in the evenings, because he had been so distracted in the weeks before he died. I told her I did not know. I lied to a grieving widow in a Methodist church in Pasadena, and I'm still not certain whether that lie was an act of cowardice or an act of mercy. After the funeral, I went home, and I wept, and I made the decision that I am now in the process of carrying out. It has been 2 years and 1 month since that night in Pasadena. I have spent that time doing 2 things. The first thing I have done is to quietly contact every member of the original Goldstone team I could reach. Ben Kowalski lives in a small house in Idaho now. He retired from JPL 3 months after Marcus died. He will not speak about Peugeot 55. When I drove to Idaho in the summer of 2024 and sat with him on his porch, he told me only one thing. He said, "Adrian, my brother died in 1979. The voice I heard in that signal, that was my brother's voice. But it wasn't saying anything my brother would have said. It was saying things he could not have known. Things about me. Things about what I have done since he died. I am 61 years old, and I have heard my dead brother describe my own divorce. I do not want to talk about it. I will not talk about it. Please do not come back." I did not go back. Yuki Tanabe Reyes is dead. She took her own life in March of 2024. She left a note. The note was 4 pages long. I have a copy, which her mother gave me, which I will not reproduce here. What I will tell you is that the note described in detail an extended conversation Yuki had been having for the previous 5 months with the voice of her dead grandmother. The voice, Yuki wrote, had become more distinct over time. The voice had begun describing things. The voice had begun making predictions, small ones at first, about events in Yuki's life. The predictions had been accurate. The voice had begun asking Yuki questions about her work, about JPL, about the other members of the team. Yuki had refused to answer. Yuki had stopped sleeping. The note ended with a single sentence, which I will reproduce. The sentence was, "It isn't her. It was never her. It only knows what she knew." Amy Castellanos is alive as far as I know, but she is no longer in Pasadena. She took an early retirement package in February 2024. She moved to a small town outside Albuquerque. I have spoken with her on the phone twice. The first time, she told me she did not want to discuss any of it. The second time, 8 months later, she called me at 3 a.m. and asked me without preamble whether I had ever considered the possibility that what we had heard in the signal was not contacting us, but cataloging us. Whether the names were not greetings, but receipts. Whether the entity in Jupiter was confirming, with each name spoken back to us, that it now possessed us. The way a collector confirms the acquisition of a new specimen. She said this in a voice that did not sound like the Amy I had known. Then she hung up. I have not heard from her since. Renata Halverson is, as far as I have been able to determine, still alive and still in Norway. She does not answer the letters I have sent. I do not know whether she chose to go or was made to. The second thing I have done is to keep listening. Not to Jupiter exactly. I no longer have the access for that. My JPL contract was not renewed in the spring of 2024. The reason given was a routine budget restructuring. The actual reason, I believe, is that Helene Vance had a quiet conversation with someone above me, and my badge stopped working on a Tuesday. But I have kept listening to the Radio Sky with equipment I have purchased privately from my apartment in Flagstaff, where I moved in late 2024 because the air is dry and the skies are dark and the rents are affordable on a savings account. And what I have found in the past 18 months is that the signal is no longer confined to Jupiter. I have detected weak narrowband emissions at the hydrogen line, modulated with audible structure, originating from at least 3 other locations in the solar system. The first is somewhere inside the south polar region of Saturn. The second is in the asteroid belt, in a position that does not correspond to any known body of significant mass, and that has been moving in ways that are not consistent with simple orbital mechanics. The third, and this is the part I have struggled most to accept, is somewhere on the lunar far side, in a region that has been imaged repeatedly by orbital surveys, and that contains by every measurement we have only regolith and a few small craters. The signals are too weak for my equipment to decode in detail, but the carrier modulation, when I have been able to extract it, contains familiar structure. It contains in each case the same embedded sequence, a prime number, the chemical formula of DNA, a population count, the Arecibo message, repeated, echoed, returned from places it could not yet have reached. I do not know what this means. I have a hypothesis, which I will share with you, because I have nothing left to lose, and because I think someone someday should hear it. My hypothesis is this: I do not believe we are being contacted. I do not believe an alien civilization is reaching out to us in our hour of cosmic loneliness. I believe something much older and much quieter and much less interested in us than we would like to think. I believe the solar system is, and may have been for a very long time, occupied, not by visitors, by residents. I believe there are objects, or entities, or instruments placed in locations across our solar system long before our species existed. I believe they have been listening, the way a microphone listens, the way a tide gauge listens, the way a thermometer in a room records the temperature without caring about the temperature. I believe they record. I believe they store. I believe what they store includes every electromagnetic transmission our planet has ever produced, going back to the first leaking radio broadcasts of the early 20th century, and possibly further. Lightning, the chemical signatures of fires, the hum of geomagnetic shifts that recorded in the iron of the seafloor the comings and goings of our ancestors. And I believe that something recently woke them up, or asked them a question, or threw a switch. And what they are doing now, when they speak to us in the voices of our dead, is not communication in any sense we would recognize. It is playback. They are playing back to us the things they have heard, selecting from their archive the audio that will most efficiently get our attention, the voice that will make Renata Halverson weep at her workstation, the syllable that will stop a 44-year-old astronomer in his chair, the dead sister of a software engineer in Pasadena, the grandmother of a girl from Hawaii. They are not greeting us. They are showing us what they have. They are showing us that they have everything. Every word any of us has ever spoken in the open air. Every name our parents called us when we thought no one else was listening. Every private syllable we believed died with the person who said it. I believe what frightens me most is not that they are speaking. It is that they have been listening for so long, so patiently, so completely, that they know us better than we have ever known ourselves. They know what our dead said to us. They know what our dead might have said to us if they had lived. They know our childhood names, and they know which of those names will hurt the most to hear. And they are using them, not maliciously. I do not believe malice enters into it. I believe they are using them the way a researcher uses a tone to test a hearing aid, to confirm that the channel is open, to confirm that we, at last, after all this time, are listening back. I do not know what happens when we answer. I do not know what the men who took my passport this morning intend to do with me, although I have my suspicions. I do not know whether this recording will ever be heard. If you are hearing it, I would like you to do one thing for me. I would like you to find, somewhere in your own life, the small private name that someone who loved you once used for you, before the world taught you to be a different person. The name your mother used when you were 3. The syllable your grandfather laughed when you came around the corner. The version of yourself that existed before you had a public face. Hold it in your mind, not out loud, just in your mind. If something speaks it back to you, in a voice you have not heard in a long time, on a frequency you did not know you were tuned to, in the small hours of the morning when the radio between stations begins to hiss in a way that feels almost like breathing, I would like you to do one thing. I would like you to not answer. I do not know if it will help. I have begun to suspect that it will not. I have begun to suspect that the answering happened a long time ago, and that what we are inside now is only the long, slow process of discovering that we have already been heard. There is a sound I can hear, sometimes late at night, in this motel room, when the ice machine in the hallway stops cycling, and the freeway noise dies down, and the desert outside settles into the particular silence that only deserts produce. It is a very faint sound. It is below the threshold of any equipment I have brought with me. It is the kind of sound a person hears in their own head and cannot quite locate. It sounds like my father in the kitchen of our small apartment in New Jersey in 1986 saying my name. It sounds like my father saying, "Adia, please come back to bed." My father has been dead for 16 years. I have not answered him. I am not going to answer him. But I have to confess, listening. I am very tired. I have been listening for a long time, and I think soon I will have to stop. This is Dr. Adrian Volkov, recording in Flagstaff, Arizona, on the night of November 12th, 2025. If you have heard this, I am grateful. I am sorry. I do not know how this ends. I only know that it has not yet ended, and that whatever it is, it knows my name, and that I have spent my entire adult life looking up at the sky, hoping that something out there knew I was here. It turns out something did. It always did. I just had not understood until now that being known is not the same as being loved. Good night, wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever your mother called you. Please, for a little while longer, be careful what you answer to.